It was the kind of night that made you want to be anywhere but outside. Rain fell in silver sheets, blowing sideways on the icy wind. A fox barked and then disappeared into the dark somewhere in the fields. The iron gates of Hawthorn Hall stood tall, black, and slick with water at the end of the gravel drive. They kept the world and everything in it out. But not everyone stayed outside. A single horse stood under the security light, pale as a ghost, with steam rising from its sides. He was huge, with a braided mane and an arched neck. He looked almost too perfect for this world. His hooves hit the stones with a sharp, impatient beat, and his head was turned toward the storm, sovereign. The brass plate on his halter said that. A girl was slumped against the iron bars next to him. Her shoes were muddy, her hair was stuck to her face, and she held her violin case like it was a lifeline. She looked too weak to be out here. She was breathing shallowly, caught between waking and sleeping. The whites of her eyes flickered every time lightning struck. Sovereign lowered his head and pushed her gently, as if to check her pulse. He didn't mind that the rain was pooling in the holes in his back. He watched her with a calm, measured intelligence, breathing softly into her messy hair. If you looked closely, you would see that his eyes were deep, steady, and blue like the night sky. They were almost human. The gates creaked open, and someone stepped into the light. Alistair Hawthorn, the hall's owner, had sharp edges and tailored lines. His hair was dark, his eyes were hard, and his coat was blowing in the wind. He stopped moving and looked at the strange scene. His stallion was out of its stall, and a stranger was on the ground. What the? He stood still for a moment, then jumped into action. He fell next to the girl and put his fingers on the side of her neck to feel for a pulse. She's still alive, but just barely. He looked up at the horse. Did you do this? Sovereign nickered, as if to say yes. Another rumble of thunder. The girl shook a lot. Alistair picked her up without thinking. He thought she would be heavier, but she was lighter. The violin case bumped against his ribs as he carried her through the rain, across the muddy yard, past the dark windows, and into the barn. The warmth inside hit like a wave. Everything is in its right place, hay bales stacked high, tools neatly hung. Sovereign followed, and the sound of his hooves on the concrete echoed. Alistair put the girl on a blanket next to a portable heater, looked for a first aid kit, and then checked her for injuries. She had a small cut on her temple and bruises on her arms, but nothing was broken. He opened her wet coat and found a wallet in the pocket on the inside. Elena Rainsford. He knew the name right away. She used to fill concert halls and be on the covers of magazines. But after her public breakdown a year ago, which included a viral video, a broken violin, and a lot of lawsuits, she disappeared. Not a single interview, picture, or blurry tabloid shot. And now she was half frozen on the floor of his barn, holding her violin like it was all she had left. Sovereign went around her and stood over her, never taking his eyes off her face. He put his nose on her cheek and breathed in and out, like a silent protector. Alistair watched, feeling uneasy. He had never seen his horse be so nice and attentive to a stranger. The heater made a humming sound. Elena's cheeks slowly started to get color back. She moaned softly, and her eyelids fluttered. She held the violin case more tightly. Alistair knelt next to her and spoke softly. You are safe. You are in Hawthorn Hall. Do you hear me? She blinked and tried to sit up, but she couldn't. The first thing she smelled was warm, sharp, and familiar hay and horses. For a moment, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, safety, or something like it. She let out a breath and closed her eyes. Alistair did his best not to look. She looked lost and fragile, not at all like the fierce prodigy on the concert posters. He got her a mug of tea and held it up to her lips. She took a sip and hardly noticed him. I found you outside, he said, not in a mean way. In the rain, why? She had a cough. Car. Stopped working. The road is blocked. I was walking, and then the horse. Her voice trailed off. The rain hit the roof hard, and the thunder rumbled in the hills. He looked at Sovereign, who was standing right in front of Elena in the barn door. He found you. She nodded, and the rain and tears on her cheeks mixed. No one said anything for a long time. Alistair thought about his choices in the quiet. Can she stay the night? Should you call the police? She was still shaking and holding her arms tightly around herself. He let out a sigh. Okay, he said more to himself than to her. You're going to stay here tonight. The barn is warm, the road is flooded, and there's nothing else to do. Sovereign moved his weight around, happy. He pushed Elena again, and his breath was warm on her face. Alistair was worried as he watched. It wasn't just the storm, the weird girl, or even the sudden change in his routine. It was the feeling, subtle and persistent, that something had changed. That tonight, everything would be different. A shadow moved behind him. It was Tom, the younger, suspicious stable hand with his arms crossed. "Who's she?" he asked, his voice short. Alistair didn't say anything. He watched as Elena, who was barely awake, curled up next to Sovereign's legs. The horse stood like a guard, as if it were daring anyone to get closer. The rafters shook with thunder. The barn felt like it was too big and too small at the same time. Elena's eyes opened and locked with Alistair's. "I'll be gone by morning," she said softly. He shook his head quickly. "We'll see about that." He really didn't know what to do for the first time in months. About the storm, the future, and most of all, the girl whom fate and a horse named Sovereign had forced into his life. The rain fell harder outside. 3 lives were intertwined inside, and each one was changed by the night. The storm had only just begun. The storm was just a memory on the wind as dawn crept across the soft, gray moors. The barn was quiet except for the sound of horses breathing steadily and the soft tick of rainwater dripping from the gutters. Elena woke up to warmth. A blanket was wrapped around her, the smell of hay was in the air, and she could hear hooves on straw in the distance. For a brief moment, she forgot about the news, the failures, and the noise. She just took a breath. Then she remembered where she was. She slowly sat up, her hair all over her face. The violin case was still next to her, and it was dry now. Sovereign stood guard just a few inches away, with his eyes half closed in what looked like happiness. As she moved, he lowered his head and blew a warm breeze over her fingers. Alistair moved quietly and quickly on the other side of the barn, checking the feed bins and running a practice hand along the backs of his horses. He caught Elena's eye and paused, a tiny hint of doubt crossing his face. He wasn't used to people coming into his world. Tom, the stable hand, watched her from the tack room with a look of distrust on his face. Elena felt the burden of being an outsider, causing trouble, making headlines, and taking risks. She could have hidden in the hay, kept her head down, and waited for the road to clear. But the barn's rhythm, routine, and familiar smell brought her back to herself. She was on her feet before she knew it, brushing straw off her coat. "Let me help," she said, her voice rough from sleep. Tom raised one eyebrow. "Do you know anything about horses?" She didn't pay attention to him and went straight to Sovereign's side, hands steady. She remembered the rules. Don't get too excited, move slowly, and speak softly. Sovereign looked at her with interest and caution, his ears turning. He shook his head and stepped back when she reached for his forelock. Tom made a noise. He's shy about his head. Doesn't like people they don't know. You could lose a finger if you're not careful. But Elena didn't give up. She lowered her voice and breathed out slowly, letting her own nerves flow out through her fingertips. "Easy, big guy," she said softly. "It's just you and me." She held her hand out with the palm open so he could smell her. Sovereign relaxed after a tense moment and let her brush his hair back. Tom's face changed. It was hard to tell if he was angry or surprised. Alistair crossed his arms and watched from the other side of the aisle, trying to look like he didn't care. But he couldn't stop looking at Elena, at how she moved with the horse and how careful she was with her hands. He also remembered the headlines, but this was not the same woman who had been on stage and gone crazy. Here, she was calm, focused, and helpful. She moved down Sovereign's body to look for scrapes and knots. She knelt by his hooves and waited for him to trust her. He thought about it for a moment, then finally raised a hoof so she could clean out the mud. Tom gave in and threw her a brush and a new rug. "Since you're so interested, you might as well do the rest." Elena smiled, a small, real smile, and got to work. The barn was filled with the soft sounds of brushes and horses sighing, hay rustling, and boots scraping the concrete. Outside, the sky cleared, and the sun came out in shaky beams. She felt good about herself after grooming Sovereign. She felt like she had something to give for the first time since her world fell apart. Alistair moved closer and kept his voice low. "You don't have to do this." Elena shrugged. "I want to. It's the least I can do after what happened last night, anyway." He nodded, but the walls didn't fall. He was all about discipline and strict control, like an island fortress with the drawbridge up. She could tell by the way he stood and watched every move and word. "Okay," he finally said. "But you have to follow the rules here. This isn't a charity." Tom snorted. "Yes. Especially not for fallen stars." Alistair gave Tom a look that could have melted steel. Elena didn't pay attention to either of them and went to the next stall. Her hands steadied and her breathing evened out as she worked. For this heartbeat in time, she belonged here, away from the noise and judgment. Later, while Tom cleaned out the stalls, Alistair came up to Elena with a cup of strong coffee. "You really know how to get around a barn," Elena said. "My grandmother had horses back when things were simpler." He looked at her, looking for something. He didn't see it. "Stable chores aren't glamorous." She smiled. "Neither is falling apart in front of people." A short, reluctant smile pulled at his lips. The tension broke a little for the first time. He said, "Come with me," and led her down a narrow hallway to a heavy wooden door. "There's something you need to see." The room on the other side was dark, and dust motes danced in the light. The walls were lined with shelves that were full of trophies, pictures, and old sheet music. There was a grand piano at the other end, with its lid closed and keys that had turned yellow with age. There was a broken music stand and a locked glass cabinet against the far wall. "Here," Alistair's voice was quieter. "This used to be my mom's music room. No one goes in there now." Elena walked across the room to look at a small, fancy box on top of the cabinet. A delicate silver music box with the words for AP carved into the top. She ran her fingers over the writing. "Who's AP?" Alistair's face went blank. "History of the family. Some of it is bad." Elena's curiosity was piqued, but she let it go. She looked around the room, where memories and silence were piling up. "Does anyone ever play?" she asked in a soft voice. He shook his head. "Not in a long time." Elena's hand was close to the music box. Her thumb flicked, and the lid opened. A weak, shaking melody came out, a song so old it hurt to hear. For a moment, she and Alistair stood still, listening to the past echo through the dust. The box suddenly clicked, and a hidden compartment opened. There was a piece of sheet music inside that was old and fragile. She took it out, and the notes started to move across the page. There was a storm outside and a storm inside. At that moment, she knew that this place was just as broken and messed up as she was. And maybe, just maybe, that's why she couldn't leave. The road outside was still flooded. But inside, a new current started to move. The wind outside still shook the windows of Hawthorn Hall, but inside, a different storm was brewing, a storm of music and memories that were both unwanted and needed. Elena did her chores and ate a quick breakfast, mostly in silence. Then she started to drift back toward the music room. There was nothing she could do. The old notes she found in the music box haunted her, and the piano in the corner called to her like an old friend who had been left alone too long. She stopped in the doorway. The place felt both holy and empty. Trophies were carefully arranged, an old metronome ticked away the seconds of the past, and sheet music was stacked in uneven piles like messages that had never been sent. Sunlight coming through a small window made pale lines on the scratched wooden floor. The violin case, which she always carried with her, was warm in her hand. She knelt down, opened it, and carefully placed her instrument in her lap. The action felt both risky and healing, like a test of whether she still had the right to the sound. Her fingers hovered over the strings, unsure of what to do. She thought about the last time she played in public and how bad it was, how ashamed she felt, and how quiet it was after that. But today, in this peaceful place, something changed. Elena picked up her violin, took a deep breath, and started to play. The first notes of the lark ascending rose slowly, then got stronger and climbed higher. The melody floated through the air, soft and painful, turning the dust into gold. She put all of her fear, regret, and buried hopes into it. The room paid attention. The house seemed to be holding its breath. Sovereign heard the sound down the hall while he was pacing in his stall. He perked up his ears and opened his eyes wide, then stretched his neck as if he were looking for the source. He pushed the stall door open with his nose, a trick he had mastered and rarely showed, then trotted out and stood at the door to the music room. He didn't go in. He just stood there with his head tilted, listening, as if even the big horse was spellbound. Tom stopped in the kitchen with a spoon halfway to his mouth and listened too. Alistair, who was deep in an account book in his study, could feel the music vibrating through the walls of the house. He stood up and quietly walked down the hall, stopping outside the music room with his arms crossed. He watched Elena, whose eyes were closed and body swayed gently as she played. She was not a fallen star but a survivor making something bigger than pain. For those few minutes, all of their past, the anger, the loss, the walls, were gone. There was only the music, which rose like the sun. The last note shook and then faded away. Elena dropped the violin to the side and shook her breath. Tears she didn't know where there ran down her cheeks. She felt both empty and full at the same time. She turned because she heard a soft sound. Sovereign was there, with his big head half in the room and his ears forward. He blinked slowly and for a long time, as if he agreed, Then he pawed the floor with one heavy hoof and let out a deep breath. It felt like a blessing. Elena was able to smile, but it was shaky. "Do you like that, boy?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Sovereign nickered softly, and his presence was calming. Alistair cleared his throat behind her. She stiffened, not sure how much he had heard. He stepped into the light with his arms crossed and a blank face. He said in a soft voice, "I forgot what that piece could do to a room. My mom loved it." Elena swallowed hard and tried to find the right words. "I needed to remember that I could still play." He nodded, and a shadow passed over his face. "You remembered more than that. You brought it back to life." For a long, weak moment, neither of them moved. Elena wanted to ask him about the music box, the sheet music, and the pictures in dusty frames, but she couldn't get the words out. Instead, she traced the lines of her violin to calm herself down. Alistair looked at her, not as a famous person, but as a real person, unsure and raw. He went to the piano, opened the lid, and played a few notes that weren't very good. The sound was a little off, but it was still lovely. He whispered, "My mother and I used to play duets," as his fingers moved over the keys. "After the fire, I stopped." Elena didn't need to ask which fire. She'd read the news and heard the pain in his voice. Years ago, Hawthorn Hall's east wing burned down, killing both of Alistair's parents and leaving him a shell of the lively boy he used to be. The house had been half empty, filled with sadness and silence. "I'm sorry," she said in a quiet voice. He shrugged, and a muscle in his jaw twitched. "You can't change what's already happened." But the words hung in the air like a challenge. "You might not be able to change the past, but you could change what you do next." The sharp clang of the doorbell echoing down the hallway broke the spell all of a sudden. Footsteps got closer, and heels clicked quickly on the stone. Tom's voice was tense when he said, Mr. Hawthorn, there's someone here. And she won't give up." Alistair's shoulders got tight. He carefully shut the lid on the piano. "I'll be back. You may want to put your violin away for now." Elena did what she was told, her heart racing with a strange mix of hope and fear. As he walked away down the hall, she saw Sovereign one last time, his tail swishing. Voices floated in from the entryway. One was a sharp, authoritative woman, and the other was calm and cautious. Elena pushed herself against the door and listened. "Lady Veronica, what do I owe you?" "I have work to do, Alistair. Business that matters. And I brought some papers that you should look at." As footsteps got closer to the music room, Elena shrank back. The air changed, and it crackled with the threat of trouble. The notes of the lark ascending were still in her head, bittersweet and hard to shake. She felt like something new was starting, just as the next storm was about to hit. Lady Veronica Marchmont walked into Hawthorn Hall, her presence all angles and confidence, with a silk scarf tied tightly under her jaw. The sun was only a suggestion behind heavy clouds. As she set a thick leather folder on the entryway table, her heels clicked like a metronome on the flagstone. She looked over every inch of the dark wood paneling with a critical eye. She walked around like she owned the place or was about to. Alistair greeted her with polite caution, standing straight with his hands behind his back. "Lady Veronica, what do we owe you the honor of?" She smiled, but it was cold and sharp. "Of course, Alistair, business. And I never come empty-handed." A man in an expensive suit was behind her. He was a local councilman. Councillor Mallory stood there awkwardly holding his hat and looking back and forth between Alistair and the dripping windows. Elena watched as the tension grew from the hallway's shadow, where she was standing. She hugged her violin case tighter, not sure if she should stay hidden or come out. Lady Veronica didn't waste any time. She took papers out of her folder. "You know the estate can't run on memories, Alistair. I have a suggestion. Sir Dominic Vane wants to buy the rights to the Lark Spring." Alistair's jaw got tight. "The spring? The river and the land around it are what you're talking about." Veronica nodded, and her eyes sparkled. "Exactly. He wants to turn the land into a high-end resort. Bring back Hawthorn Hall's glory by bringing in jobs, tourists, and money. The council is ready to speed up all permissions with Mallory's help. You're sitting on a gold mine. It's time to do something." Mallory tried to smile, but it looked more like a frown. "It's a good thing for everyone, Mr. Hawthorn. The village needs a new start." Elena could feel Sovereign next to her. He had come up behind her and was standing there with his big head over her shoulder, as if he knew she was uncomfortable. His body was tense, his ears were pinned back, and his nostrils flared every time someone said spring. Lady Veronica kept going, not knowing. "There are terms that are very generous. Dominic will pay more than the market value for the water rights and a long-term lease on the stables. Of course, you get to keep the hall. But it's time to let go of the rest. Alistair, you can't keep patching this roof. The words were like weapons, and every syllable was an attack. Elena saw Alistair's eyes fight between pride and pain as he tried to keep his cool. He was trapped, and they both knew it. Years of unpaid taxes, unfinished repairs, and old money that was slowly leaking out. She could tell by the look in his eyes that he was figuring out what he could save and what he had to lose. A new person came into the picture. Sir Dominic Vane himself, tall, graceful, and full of confidence, walked in and reached out to pat Sovereign's flank. But the stallion stepped to the side, raising its head, and Elena moved between Vane's hand and the horse's shoulder without thinking. "Be careful," she said in a low but firm voice. "He doesn't like people he doesn't know." Vane laughed. "Don't you think we're all just visitors in this world, my dear?" She didn't say anything. Instead, she put a calming hand on Sovereign's neck and felt his pulse beating under her palm. The horse calmed down, but it didn't stop looking at Vane. Veronica looked at Elena with one quick look. "And you are?" "Elena," she said, raising her chin. "Just passing through." "Well," Veronica said with a fake smile, "you've picked an interesting time to come. After all, we're making history." The meeting moved to the drawing room, and Elena followed along the edge, stopping near the door. She listened as people talked about numbers that made her head spin, and the promise of easy salvation was dangled in front of her like bait. It sounded like the hall's soul was being sold piece by piece with every word. Alistair spoke softly, trying not to show any emotion in his voice. "And what if the village doesn't like it? The spring is more important to them than the numbers on the page." Mallory shrugged. "There are ways to speed things up. If it comes to that, the council can go after a compulsory purchase order. You'd probably rather leave with something in your pocket." All of a sudden, the room felt colder. Elena noticed that her fists were clenched and her nails were digging into her palm. She looked at Alistair and saw the tight line of his mouth and the way his hands shook a little. Sovereign stood next to her like a statue, reminding her of what was at stake. She felt a sudden loyalty, even though it didn't make sense. She had to protect this place, even though she didn't really belong here. Maybe it was the music room, the ghosts in the walls, or just the memory of a home that was once lost. Whatever it was, it made her stay where she was. Lady Veronica's voice got softer, like honey. "Alistair, just sign. You could fix everything with a pen stroke, the taxes, the workers' pay, and the repairs." Alistair's eyes flashed with pain, but it quickly went away. He said in a clipped voice, "I'll think about it." "That's all we ask," Veronica said with a smile. "But don't take too long. Dominic's offer won't last forever." They left as quickly as they came, a storm of perfume and ambition, leaving behind silence. Elena finally let out a breath. She looked at Alistair and saw how much history was weighing on him. This made her angry. She wanted to say something, either to comfort or to stand up to him, but the words got stuck in her throat. Tom slipped Elena a letter, an email he had quickly printed out, in that fragile silence. He said, "Came for you." She took it with hands that were shaking. It was an invitation to perform at a gala in London, which would give her a chance to get back on stage and get back everything she had lost. The road outside the village was still blocked, but Elena was at a crossroads inside. Stay and fight for a home that wasn't hers? Or go and chase a future she wasn't sure she wanted? Alistair looked at her in search for something, help, hope, or forgiveness. But all Elena could see was the storm, which was gathering again on the horizon, and the choice that waited at its center. A strange silence fell over Hawthorn Hall in the late afternoon. The storm was over, but the air was still heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The road to the village was still flooded and blocked by fallen branches. This made Elena's choices seem both fewer and clearer. She stood in the sand ring, brushing dirt off of Sovereign's coat. The brush's steady sound and the smell of horse and leather made her feel better. The barn was full of noise, the sound of hooves, Tom swearing as he fixed a broken halter, and the voices of workers far away fixing a leaking gutter. But none of it got through to her. The invitation to the gala burned in her pocket. It was a way to get away and get back to being the person she used to be. But as the hours went by, Hawthorn Hall felt less like a prison and more like a job. Sovereign watched her closely, his ears twitching with each move. Elena took him to the lunge line and started him walking while she held the line in her hand. The stallion walked around her, head held high, strong but calm, testing her cues with each step. She looked at the house and saw Alistair's shadow in an upstairs window. For a split second, their eyes met. His face was a mix of pride, worry, and maybe even hope. After that, he went behind the curtains. Elena took a big breath. "Let's see what you can do, boy." She clucked her tongue to get Sovereign to move smoothly. The horse's muscles tightened and relaxed, and his steps were exact and steady. The rhythm picked up as she asked for more speed. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp, mechanical whine cut through the air. The sound of a far-off water pump sputtered to life somewhere near the far paddocks. Sovereign's head jerked up, his eyes wide, and his body tensed. For a second, Elena lost him. The big horse jumped to the side, almost pulling the lunge line out of her hands. She dug in her heels and called out in a low, steady voice, "Easy, steady." His nostrils flared as he skittered in a half-circle, his legs churning sand. Elena kept her body open, took deep breaths, and spoke in the soft, sure, patient tone she had learned to trust. Sovereign's panic slowly went away. He shook out his mane and blew hard while looking at the hedgerow with suspicion. Tom ran, and the mud splashed up to his knees. "Are you okay?" She nodded and took a breath. He just got scared at the pump. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. Not to Sovereign, not to Elena, and definitely not to Alistair, who had come down from the house with a worried look on his face. "You're pushing him too hard," he said, his voice tense. Elena gave Tom the lunge line and wiped the sweat off her forehead. "He needs to work out. And I do too." Alistair paused to watch Sovereign settle down. "I guess you'll be leaving soon. The road should be clear by tomorrow." She shook her head and couldn't look him in the eye. "I got a chance to play again. In London. Big party, it's a chance to come back." He turned his head and worked his jaw. "You should take it. Not your problem, this place." She turned because of something in his voice. He was fragile, and the edges of his pride were barely holding back his need. She saw the cracks, a man trying to do too much with too little help. She made herself talk. "What if I want to help? What if I want to stay?" Alistair's face darkened, as if her offer hurt more than helped. "Don't get too close. This isn't a storybook. I can't save the hall, even if I wanted to. The council, Veronica and Vane, will make a sale happen. I'm just putting things off because of the taxes and repairs." Tom, who was always blunt, spoke up. "Stalling? I heard that there's already some kind of option agreement in place. With Vane's people." Alistair stopped moving. The air in the yard got thicker, and all pretense was gone. Elena thought for a second that he might deny it, but he just turned away with his fist clenched. Tom shrugged. "Alistair, you're not the only one with secrets. The village should know if you signed something." Elena stepped forward because she was angry. "What kind of choice? What does it mean for the hall and for the spring?" Alistair's voice was tense. "It means I might have already doomed this place, even though I didn't mean to." There was silence. The workers had stopped hammering, and Tom looked down at the ground. Elena tried to calm down as her heart raced. Had she thrown herself into a lost cause, into someone else's fight, only to see it slip through her fingers? Sovereign nudged her arm, as if he could tell she was unsure. She put her cheek against his neck and felt better because he was there. Finally, Alistair spoke up. "Listen, you need to think about your own career. Head to London. Play your song. Don't get caught up in this. I'll take care of it." Elena, on the other hand, couldn't let it go. After the stables were quiet that night, she sneaked into the hall's small office. There were a lot of secrets and dust in the air. She looked through old files, utility bills, and faded pictures until she found a clean folder labeled Option, Lark Spring. There was a contract inside that was full of legalese and had Alistair's signature and the company's letterhead on it. She shook as she read the fine print, the clauses, and the dates. It was true. Alistair had given up the future of Hawthorn Hall, maybe not for good, but enough to give Vane an advantage. Elena's heart ached for the man upstairs, who was all alone in a house full of ghosts. She came back to the present when she heard the rain on the glass. Now she understood what was at stake. It would be up to her to decide. She could fight for a place that wasn't hers to save, or she could walk away and save herself. The old pipes above her groaned, and in the distance, Sovereign whickered softly in his stall. It was a sad, lonely sound. Elena held the contract close to her chest and stared into the dark. She felt the weight of everything she couldn't leave behind. The night was heavy over Hawthorn Hall. The wind outside scratched at the old glass panes, and shadows grew long in the lamplight. Elena's mind was racing with what she had found in the office. The option contract was like a secret she didn't want but couldn't ignore. The house seemed to breathe around her, restless, full of things that needed to be said and questions that needed to be asked. She was unable to sleep. She saw Alistair's signature, the neat legal paragraphs, and the stamped seal of a company she had only heard about in whispers every time she closed her eyes. The words kept playing in her head. Option to buy. Exclusive rights. Payment to be made. A slow, unavoidable slide toward losing everything. She was pacing back and forth in the hallway outside the stables, still wearing the clothes she had worn the day before, her knuckles white around her violin case. She could hear Sovereign moving around in his stall, restless and picking at his bedding. His presence gave her comfort, like a witness to everything falling apart. Alistair showed up, and she was still there, quiet as a ghost and with dark circles under her eyes. He looked at her and saw the folder in her hands. He let out a slow, tired breath. "You found it," he said in a low voice. She nodded, her jaw set. "You didn't tell anyone?" "Not even Tom." His mouth turned. "It was meant to be a short-term fix. I was desperate because of the taxes and the staff. They kept telling me to sign and buy time and that no one would know unless I took the money. I never got it. Not a single penny." Elena shook her head, her heart racing. "But you did open the door, Alistair. By law." He raised a hand and spoke in a rough voice. "I know. I thought I could fix it before it became important. But things kept getting worse." The anger, fear, and shame in his voice were all too familiar. Elena wanted to scream at him and tell him how selfish, unfair, and reckless it was to put everyone's future at risk. But she knew what it was like to be desperate and have to make choices without knowing what would happen. She then asked, "What now? Do you tell the town? Or just wait for Vane to pull the rug out from under you?" He turned away, and rain was running down the window of the stable. "I don't know. I wish I could say I had a plan." Elena threw the folder down on a bin for feeding. "You should have put your faith in someone. Anyone." A long silence fell, and the only sound was Sovereign's restless moving. Finally, Alistair spoke, but his voice was quieter. "You should go to London, Elena. Don't get involved in this. Let it go, Hall." She looked at him with anger. "You keep saying that, but you don't mean it. You want someone else to fight for you, but you won't ask." His face got darker, and his proud jaw set harder. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything." She laughed with anger. "Don't I? You think you're the only one who has ghosts?" The stress, the secrets, and the fear of failing again made something inside her snap. "Okay," she said, picking up her violin and going to the door. "I won't make you get help if you don't want it." She walked out into the cold, with mist swirling around her feet. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed to get away from it all, get some fresh air, and shake off the feeling of doom that was hanging over her. She walked past the overgrown gardens and down the muddy path to the edge of the property. Sovereign nickered behind her, sensing her trouble and scratching at the stall door. Alistair watched from the barn, his anger turning into tiredness. The tension inside the house was high. Tom, who had heard about the fight, pushed Alistair for the truth. "What's happening? You and Elena are both acting like the world is about to end." Alistair thought for a moment before telling Tom everything: the contract, the taxes, the threats from Vane's lawyers, and how he had hoped for a miracle that never came. Tom listened in silence, his jaw tightening with each new piece of information. Tom said, "So you sold us out," with hard eyes. "No." Alistair shot back. He couldn't finish. The word was there, ugly and impossible to deny. Tom didn't say anything else before he left. Alistair couldn't sit still, so he saddled Sovereign, hoping to find something he could control. He took the stallion out into the mist before dawn. His boots sank into the wet grass, and his breath came in ragged clouds. He got on and dug his heels in, and Sovereign started to canter down the path he knew well to the old stream. But even the big horse could tell that his rider was scared. Sovereign stopped at the narrow jump by the ditch and wouldn't jump. He stood up a little, his muscles tensing, and wouldn't go where Alistair told him to. "Come on," Alistair said, his anger getting the best of him. But Sovereign just stepped aside, shaking his head and looking wide-eyed and unsure. The horse seemed to be a mirror, showing all the doubt, fear, and deep feeling of being lost. Alistair stopped and breathed heavily. He slid off the saddle and stood next to Sovereign, letting the horse's breath calm him down. For a moment, he rested his forehead on Sovereign's neck and felt the warmth and steadiness that he didn't have. "I'm sorry," he said in a low voice. "I don't know what to do." Elena, on the other hand, walked alone to the edge of the property, her boots wet with dew. She took out her phone, looked through the invitation to London, and then looked through missed calls from Layla, her old friend and the only person she could talk to outside of her house. A new message popped up urgent. Lady Veronica called a trust meeting for 7 days. Vane wants to finish the deal. A second message came. This time with an attachment. The FOIA request came back and said that Vane's old plant had broken the law by dumping trash near Lark Spring. This could change everything. Please call me. Elena looked at the screen, and a crazy mix of hope and disbelief rose in her chest. Proof. There might be a chance if she could get Alistair to fight. She turned back toward the hall, her resolve growing stronger. This wasn't the end. Not at all. When the first gray light of morning hit the moors, Alistair came back, covered in mud and quiet, with Sovereign close by. Elena stood at the barn door, her eyes shining with purpose. She said in a clear, steady voice, "I'm not leaving. But you have to believe me. We all have to work together to save this place. Everything is in. Not any more secrets." Alistair hesitated, and the fight was going on in his eyes. Finally, he nodded, and the old walls fell apart a little. As the new day began, they stood there, side by side, with a tired horse and a broken violin between them, ready to face whatever the storm would bring. It was the kind of morning that didn't come with the sun but with the determination of people who were too scared to wait any longer. Hawthorn Village had always been a place where secrets traveled from one house to another on the cold air. But now that news was spreading about the spring, the hall, and the shadow of development, the village was ready to fight for itself. Neil, the local pub owner and a voice that everyone respected, called an emergency meeting at the Roebuck. When Elena and Alistair got there, the pub was packed with farmers with rough hands, shopkeepers, kids with instruments, teens sitting on the backs of chairs, and even Mrs. Tulliver, who hadn't left her cottage in weeks. The air was full of a sense of urgency and the smell of spilled cider. Alistair had never seen his neighbors work together like this before, and he felt a knot form in his stomach that was both shameful and hopeful. Tom stood nearby with his arms crossed, but he gave Elena a quick, encouraging nod as she pushed her way through the crowd with her violin case. Neil cleared his throat and knocked on the bar with his knuckles. "Okay, everyone. We all know what the rumors are. Vane wants to buy the season. Lady Veronica and Mallory believe they can make it happen. But we can't sell this village unless we want to." There was a low murmur of agreement in the pub. Alistair stepped forward, his voice shaking. "I haven't always told you the truth. I signed an option agreement because I thought it would give us more time. I never took the money, but I did give Vane some power. I'm sorry." There was silence in the room for a long time. Neil then nodded. "That's all done now. What matters is what we do next." Layla, Elena's friend and the town's unofficial source of information, stood up and held up her phone. "We have proof that Vane's company broke environmental laws by dumping trash illegally and messing with water sources. We can fight the mandatory order if we go public and get the right legal help." A wave of excitement. Someone said, "But the council will just drag it out. They have the money and the lawyers." Neil said, "Then we do what this place does best," with determination written all over his face. "We fight together as a community. Whatever it takes, a fundraiser, legal fees, anything." Elena felt something inside her wake up, like a string being tuned after being quiet for months. She held on to her violin case even tighter. "If we need money, let's use what we have, music. There can be a concert in the barn. We'll get everyone together, show them what we're fighting for, and stream it live to anyone who wants to see it." The idea set the room on fire. Layla was already making lists of who could play, who had cameras, and which families could bring food and lanterns. The kids cheered, the parents promised to help, and Mrs. Tulliver, who surprised everyone, offered her famous honey cakes. Tom raised his hand, and his voice was surprisingly soft. "There is a picture in the attic that might help. Alistair's mom painted it, and it might be worth enough to pay for the first round of lawyers' fees." Alistair thought for a moment, the weight of memory settling over him, and then he nodded. "It's worth it if it saves the hall in the spring." The plan was in action by noon. The barn, which is usually full of hay and sleepy horses, turned into a busy place. Kids from the village came rushing in with borrowed violins and worn-out sheet music. Elena and Layla set up a groom class for the little ones, where they taught them how to braid ribbons into Sovereign's mane and attach homemade rosettes to his halter. Sovereign put up with the attention with quiet dignity, letting little hands pat his neck and stick paper stars to his forelock. Layla even put a GoPro on his halter and told the kids, "You'll see the barn through Sovereign's eyes." As the day went on, the feeling of community grew stronger. The music mixed with the smell of hay, the sound of laughter, and the sound of boots scraping on the old stone floor. Alistair kept himself busy fixing fences and going through the hall's records to find anything that might help the lawyers. This time, he moved with a purpose, not just fear. Elena took a break later that afternoon and went outside to see the sun break through the clouds. Layla found her with a phone in her hand and her eyes shining. "You have to check this out." She took Elena to the side and showed her the video from Sovereign's GoPro. The horse's slow walk along the fence line caught everything. The kids laughing, the adults setting up tables, and, most surprisingly, a thin line of wet mud that ran from the old boundary to the edge of the spring. As Sovereign walked by, the camera picked up the faint but clear sound of machinery whirring in the distance. "That's Vane's group. They've been drilling, which is against the law," Layla said in a low voice. "We also have the audio. This is the proof the lawyers need." Elena's heart raced. The proof was right there, accidentally caught by a horse. "Send it to me. I'll send it to everyone on the legal list." The barn was almost ready for the concert by sunset. Kids practiced in the corners, parents hung lanterns from the rafters, and Tom laughed with the kids for the first time as he helped Sovereign walk around the ring with paper rosettes hanging from his mane. Alistair watched it all with a strange pain in his chest. He thought about his parents and all the things he had failed to protect. For the first time, he thought that maybe he could finally do right by his home. Layla gave Elena a flash drive full of videos and documents as the villagers began to head home for dinner. "Take it. Use it however you want. And what about Elena? This village is also yours. Don't forget it." Elena put the drive in her pocket, and her determination grew stronger. That night, when the hall was dark and quiet, she opened her email and sent everything to the press, the lawyers, and the council. She only wrote one line in her message: "This place is worth fighting for. I hope you can see it." She heard Sovereign's low, steady breathing in the next stall, the creaking of the barn roof, and the sound of kids laughing far away on the wind as she closed her laptop. Elena felt like she was finally where she belonged, ready for the fight, with music, truth, and the support of a whole village behind her. Elena should have felt alive in the buzzing city of London. The rehearsal hall for the gala was all crystal light and velvet seats. Every wall seemed to be buzzing with the promise of applause. But her hands shook as she tuned her violin. She played the same scales, arpeggios, and patterns she had been playing since she was a child, but her mind kept drifting miles away to a barn full of lanterns, a stallion with ribbons in his mane, and a community that wouldn't let history fade away. The music directors praised her tone, and the organizers welcomed her back to the world of spotlights, but none of it got through to her. She looked at her phone every 5 minutes to read messages from Layla, Tom, and even a handwritten note from Mrs. Tulliver that her granddaughter scanned and sent. "The hall is worth every fight. So are you, sweetheart." She got her cue and walked out onto the rehearsal stage. There were only a few bored techs and musicians in the audience. She could almost smell hay and hear the rumble of Sovereign's hooves in the dirt as she picked up her violin. She was overwhelmed by the memory of music playing in Hawthorn's old parlor, of laughter and rosin dust, and of the wild, impossible hope that something broken could be fixed. She began to play, but she didn't really want to. The notes were perfect, but they sounded empty, as if her soul had stayed in the village. In the end, the conductor tapped his baton and looked worried. "Elena, you're playing so well. But are you sure you're with us?" She hesitated, the words clawing out. "I'm sorry. I need a minute." With her phone in hand, she ran to the wings. There was a new message from Layla waiting for her. This one had a video with it. Elena hesitated, her thumb shaking, and hit play. The screen came to life with the barn concert in full swing. Under the rafters, children, villagers, and even Tom all gathered. Their faces were lit by candlelight and hope. Sovereign stood like a statue in the middle of it all, with his head down and little hands patting his nose. Elena's heart hurt. Then she saw Alistair, who looked uncomfortable in a jacket that was too tight. He proudly introduced her, saying her name like it meant home. The camera moved to the crowd, and for a moment, the frame froze on a girl who looked to be no older than 9. She had her eyes closed and was playing the same piece Elena had played at the hall, The Lark Ascending. Elena's determination snapped into place at that moment. She dried her tears, picked up her violin, and left the rehearsal room. Almost right away, her phone rang. Layla was out of breath. "Are you watching, Elena? The lawyers are calling the video, the water samples, and the GoPro audio evidence gold. Lady Veronica called a meeting of the trust for tomorrow, and Vane's lawyer is upset. You need to be here." Elena didn't think twice. "Get me the first train going north." The ride back to Hawthorn was a blur. Raindrops raced down the windows, the countryside opened up in gray and green, and my heart raced with every mile closer to home. She looked out at the darkening sky, and the city lights faded away, which made the tension in her chest go away. The air was thick with excitement and the smell of rain when she got to the village. The pub was full of people, Layla, Tom, Neil, and half the village. People stopped talking when Elena walked in. Tom lifted his mug. "You came back." Elena nodded, and for the first time in weeks, her voice was steady. "This isn't just your place. It's mine as well. And I'm ready to fight." People clapped loudly and happily. Neil gave her a pat on the shoulder. "We have the proof, the press, and the best violinist in Britain. We will stand together tomorrow." Elena went back to the hall that night. The old manor looked different, not bigger, but more alive, as if each window was full of stories from the past and the present. She saw Alistair in the parlor, where papers were all over the place and he looked tired. He looked up, and hope shone in his eyes. She stood in the doorway, not sure what to do. "I made a promise to myself on the train. I'll play that concert, but only if you promise not to hide anymore or make deals behind closed doors. You tell everyone all your secrets. We fight as a family, or not at all." He nodded, and the weight on his shoulders went away, replaced by something honest and bright. "This morning, I filed a restrictive covenant. I wrote a letter to Vane's lawyers saying that the option was no longer valid. We might get sued, but at least we'll do it on our own terms and with the truth." They smiled at each other, even though it was shaky. Elena sat down on the old piano bench, took out her violin, and started to play. Alistair joined her. He wasn't very good at the keys, but he was trying. The room filled with music and the quiet miracle of starting over. Sovereign looked through the window at the pale moonlight outside. The big horse stood between them and the night, and his breath made the glass foggy. Elena got up, went outside into the dew, and gently pressed her forehead against Sovereign's. He snorted, warm and steady, holding her down. "I'm back," she whispered, and the promise hung in the air. Alistair came over and put his arm around Elena's shoulder. They stood together in the dark, not afraid for the first time. They chose to be honest, chose each other, and dared the world to try to break what they had begun to fix. As the sun rose, the headlights of a car swept over the driveway. Sir Dominic Vane and Lady Veronica arrived early, their faces set with the grim certainty of people who expect to win. Hawthorn Hall, on the other hand, was ready. The doors were open. The truth was out in the open. And this time, Elena, Alistair, Sovereign, and everyone else in the village would stand up for themselves. The morning was so cold that it felt like the world was holding its breath. There was a lot of nervous energy at Hawthorn Hall. The villagers were dressed up for Sunday, the kids were running back and forth between the kitchen and the barn, and Layla was getting calls from lawyers and journalists. Even Sovereign seemed to feel the tension. He stood tall and watchful by the paddock gate, as if he were waiting for his own cue. By 9 o'clock, a line of cars was snaking up the drive. There were council members in dark suits, Lady Veronica's fancy sedan, Sir Dominic Vane in a spotless roadster, and the press, who were always late and always looking for a show. The planning subcommittee had agreed to meet at the village hall, but the most important part of the day would happen in two places: the cold, formal chamber where decisions would be made, and the barn, which would be turned into a place of hope and music. Elena put on her clothes with shaking hands, pinning her hair up and straightening her old concert dress. Alistair stood in the hallway with a new look in his eyes, a crooked collar, and a set jaw. They nodded at each other, and that was the end of the running and the secrets. The sky outside looked like it might rain, but it didn't. Gray clouds swirled as villagers and officials walked into the hall. Alistair sat down at the council table, with the new lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Cartwright, on one side. She had their last, best hope in a thick file of evidence. Elena stayed behind, her nerves on edge, getting ready for her own fight. The air in the council chamber was thick with excitement. Councillor Mallory cleared his throat and read the agenda as if nothing out of the ordinary was going on. Lady Veronica sat still with a practiced smile on her face, while Vane's lawyers whispered angrily behind their laptops. Alistair was the first to get up. His voice was calm, but each word cost him something. Hawthorn Hall is more than just bricks and water rights. It's our village, our past, and our future. I made mistakes when I signed the contract out of fear. But this group of people never gave up. We have proof of drilling that is against the law and bad for the environment. Cartwright stood up and took out the flash drive and a pile of papers. FOIA requests, GoPro videos, water test results, and letters to the Environmental Agency. Sir Dominic Vane has a history of polluting places he's been, and we have reason to believe he wants to do the same here. A murmur went through the room. Vane's lawyer objected, saying the evidence was circumstantial and not relevant. Mallory pursed his lips to remind everyone that this was not a trial. But the counsel was paying attention now, and there was doubt in their eyes. For the first time, Lady Veronica's gaze wavered. Cartwright gave her a picture from the GoPro. It showed a child's rosette that was dirty because a stream of black water was coming from where Vane was drilling. As the legal battle dragged on outside, the barn filled with music. Elena, who had a violin in her hand, led the Hawthorn young strings through their last practice. The kids were so small that they could barely hold their bows. Tom was busy putting up bunting and checking the livestream camera again and again, glancing nervously at his phone for updates every so often. Some villagers stood shoulder to shoulder in the barn, while others sat on hay bales. The smell of grass, old wood, and freshly baked honey cakes filled the air. Sovereign stood at the end, looking beautiful with his mane freshly brushed and kids braiding ribbons into his tail. Layla ran back and forth between the barn and the council, sending Elena texts with updates. Mallory is being uncooperative. Cartwright just played the video. Veronica seems shaken up. Vane's team is fighting for every point. Elena took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and felt her heart slow down to match the barn's heartbeat. She picked up her violin and let everything else fade away as the first clear, golden notes of the lark ascending played. Her music was high, trembling, and pure, and it rose above the silence, drawing in every ear and heart. The children followed, their voices small but steady, and they felt brave as they worked together. The barn was more than just a place to stay. It was a cathedral, a rally, and living proof of what was at stake. Tom watched, his eyes shining with pride, as even the youngest players got lost in the music. Sovereign stood still, his ears moving, and his breath rose in misty clouds. Elena saw him out of the corner of her eye, the hall's spirit, unbroken and unafraid. The tide started to turn at the council. Cartwright asked for a 10-minute break and pointed to Alistair and Layla. Start the live stream. Tell them what they're really voting for. Elena saw the camera's red light turn on when she got back to the barn. Now her hands weren't shaking. She closed her eyes and played like it was her last concert. The music was sad and hopeful, the kind that makes people believe in second chances. Lady Veronica watched the live stream in the chamber, her lips shaking. Her eyes were full of memories, like the time her mother rode side-saddle through the fields on the back of Sovereign's dam. The music found her, breaking through the years and breaking the mask she wore. Mallory hit the gavel and asked for a vote. The air was tight like a wire. One by one, the council members spoke. Some talked about money, others about the strength of the evidence, but all of them looked at the screen, the kids' faces, the barn sweep, and the horse standing guard in the light of the music. The vote was close, but it was in Hawthorn's favor. The sale that had to happen didn't happen. The spring, the hall, and the heart of the village would not be sold today or on Vane's terms. In a final twist, Cartwright stood up and showed records of Vane's past crimes, which are now part of the public record. Questions flew as the press rushed forward. Lady Veronica stood up and walked over to Alistair, her eyes wet. She whispered, "Your mother would have been proud." Vane was in a corner and threatened to sue in court, but everyone knew that the tide had turned. The village was no longer just a group of houses. It was a story, a cause, and a reason to fight. The last note faded away in the barn. The crowd cheered and clapped, kids threw their bows into the air, parents hugged, and Sovereign let out a loud, triumphant whinny that shook the rafters. Elena put down her violin and was suddenly in the middle of the party. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in a future that didn't run away from the past. A few moments later, Alistair came in, out of breath and with a bright face. He took Elena's hands and spun her around in the sawdust, laughing and feeling better. "We did it. You did it." She shook her head, and her eyes were full of tears. "No, we all did." As the barn doors swung open to the gathering dusk, the villagers spilled out into the fields, carrying the music with them and singing together, defiant, grateful, and alive. The fight wasn't over, Vane would keep coming, and storms would rise again. But for now, the heart of Hawthorn Hall beat strong, surrounded by friends, family, and the promise of morning. Hawthorn Hall felt different 6 months later, not just looked different. Summer had come to the valley, and the fields were full of gold and green. The sky looked bigger, the days seemed longer, and the river larks sparkled in the sun, as if nothing bad could ever happen there again. Elena stood in the backyard and watched kids chase each other through the rose bushes. Over the newly restored stone wall, people laughed, and a bandstand rose where the old tool shed used to lean, with bright banners fluttering in the wind. Under the tent, the Hawthorn Young String Quartet was tuning up. Their bows were nervously tapping sheet music, and their faces were flushed with excitement. Elena smiled, and inside her chest, pride and peace grew. Alistair walked through the crowd with his sleeves rolled up, saying hello to people from the village, shaking hands with shopkeepers, and even helping Mrs. Tulliver find a seat under the big elm tree. He was no longer the ghostly figure hiding in empty halls. Instead, he walked with an open confidence that people noticed and trusted. The estate wasn't rich, but it was in good shape. The roof had just been patched, and there was no threat of auction or collapse hanging over his head thanks to a growing repair fund. Sovereign quietly grazed in the paddock, his mane braided with summer ribbons. Kids gathered around the fence and gave him pieces of apple while whispering secrets to him, as if he were a mythical being who had seen all of their fights and victories. Elena walked over and ran her hand down his neck, letting the moment ground her in something real and simple. Hawthorn's Garden Day, a day for music and laughter with stalls for cakes, preserves, and village crafts, had almost become a tradition overnight. The larch spring, which was once in danger, now flowed through a public path lined with wildflowers and wooden benches. Under the willow trees, families had picnics, and teens hung their feet over the edge of the cool water, their voices echoing off the ripples. Layla hurried up with a smile on her face and her phone in her hand. Vane's threats are getting less loud. The council is on our side. Lady Veronica's public statement changed everything. The environmental agreement is rock solid. He can sue, but everyone knows he will lose. You did it, Elena. Elena shook her head, her heart full. We did it, everyone. Layla laughed. And you're not done yet. The press is here to talk to you about your new program for village musicians and how the hall is now open to the public. Elena smiled and pushed a piece of hair out of her eyes. I'll tell them it's not just about music. It's about being part of something. Alistair joined them and wiped the sweat off his forehead. Are you ready for the big show? You're next. Elena's stomach felt like it was going to burst with nerves, but she nodded. Always. As they walked to the bandstand, the crowd grew more and more excited. Elena raised her violin and looked into the eyes of every child, parent, and neighbor who had been with them. Alistair raised a hand to ask for silence. He started with a strong voice. Thank you all for coming. We were about to lose everything 6 months ago. But you all fought, and that's why we're still here. The hall is now more than just a house, it's a home. For all of us. The crowd cheered loudly. Elena moved to the front and raised her bow. The first notes of the lark ascending floated over the gardens. As the melody grew, the children's soft, unsure voices joined in, followed by their parents' strong, sure harmonies. The music floated on the summer breeze, across the fields, up through open windows, and down the lanes to the river. Sovereign raised his head, and his ears moved forward as if he were listening. Elena caught his eye and felt the same connection that had been there since the first night of the storm. The feeling that sometimes you are led to exactly where you need to be, even if you don't know why. When the music stopped, people clapped again. Mrs. Tulliver wiped her eyes. Layla yelled, Tom smiled, and Alistair stepped up with something in his hand. He looked at Lady Veronica, who was waiting at the edge of the crowd. She looked elegant and a little softer than she used to. Alistair's voice rang out. You were right about one thing. This place needed to change. But not how Vane thought it would be. Thanks for helping us understand that. She smiled, took his hand, and put something in it, a family ring that shone in the sun. Your mom would have wanted you to have it. Use it well. Alistair put the ring on his finger and then turned to Elena, his eyes shining. You asked me once if the hall would ever open its doors. I want you to see it for yourself. He took her down the river path, and the whole village followed. As Alistair stopped under the big willow, the crowd gathered on the bank. He got down on one knee and took Elena's hand. He didn't need to give a speech. His voice was low, steady, and real. You brought music back to this place and to me. Elena, will you stay? Will you marry me, not just for the hall, but for every new note and every quiet morning that comes? Elena's heart dropped. The river and the far-off thump of hooves were the only sounds for a long time. Sovereign cantered along the fence, and the sun caught in his mane. Yes, she said softly, with tears in her eyes and a big smile on her face. Yes. For this place, for us, and for every second chance. People in the crowd cheered, and someone started to play again. The music rose and fell with the wind over the fields. Parents hugged, kids ran along the banks, and even Sovereign seemed to nod, as if to bless the promise. Later, as dusk fell over Hawthorn Hall, Elena and Alistair rode along the river together, with Sovereign moving slowly and steadily. Alistair bent down, picked up a loose strand of his horse's mane, and gave it to Elena. She made a simple loop out of it and put it over her wrist. It was a living, breathing reminder of everything they had fought for and found. The hall was full of light and laughter that night. Elena played until her fingers hurt, Alistair laughed with the kids, and Layla raised a glass to the future. They ended up keeping the hall. But more than that, they kept each other and the idea that home isn't just a place. It is the people who fight for it, the music that fills its walls, and the bravery to open the door over and over again. And somewhere in the night, the river sang on. Its song went through grass, stone, and dreams, promising that there would always be another chance as long as people love, hope, and dare.